Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to look at loops. And we have three types of loops we're going to look at: a for, a while, and a do-while loop. So a loop enables our program to repeat statements multiple times, or blocks of code multiple times. And so the language provides us, as I said, three types of loops: a for, a while, and a do-while. So loops in C++ have either a loop index, some kind of counter, or some kind of variable to stop it. You have to have some way of basically stopping your loop, because otherwise you would have an infinite loop and it would never break out of that section of code. So there's typically three parts to a loop: an initial assignment for the loop counter or stopping variable, a condition, which you'll use the same way of writing conditional statements as you did with the if statement, and an altering statement that actually changes the counter or stopping variable so that eventually it'll meet this condition that will stop it. So the first loop we're going to look at is the for loop. And here we see the for loop shows this pretty explicitly. We have a for is the keyword. In parentheses, you put a initialization statement, a test condition, which is kind of like the conditional in your if statement, and then an instruction on how to update it. And then inside of these curly braces, which are your block of code, you put in the statements that you want to be looped multiple times. We can diagram it with a flowchart like this. Here we see the initialization of a variable. The condition is I less than 50, and it'll print out a hello world. And this is the loop update section where it's incrementing I each time. And so in this condition, I starts at 0. We say, is 0 less than 50? Yes, it is. Print out hello world. Increment I is now 1. It goes through, and we'll just keep looping through this until I becomes 50. When it becomes 50, it will no longer be less than 50. Then the execution goes down this no branch, and we say goodbye. And programmatically, that looks like this. We see I equals 0. That's the initialization. This is the condition, which is here. And then this is the increment, or the loop changing, because you can actually increment or decrement. You can count up or down with this code. And then you have what you want to do in the loop, and then you have, continuing on after that. So here's an example of writing a loop. We have int I. You can declare the variable outside it or even inside the loop. You saw here, yeah, they did the same thing. So you could either declare it inside of here or outside. And we're going to start here. I is equal to 0. And so we're going to keep track of what I is down in this area. So is I less than 50? 0 is in fact less than 50. We say hello world. We increment I, which makes it now 1. Is 1 less than 50? Yes. Another hello world. We increment I. Is 2 less than 50? Yes. We have hello world. I becomes 3. And it will continue going so on and so forth. So the way you can think of it is this happens once, then we check this, and then it just kind of goes in a loop like that until it's done. So let's say so go ahead and try this. Write it down on a sheet of paper and pause the presentation, and then hit continue when you're done. Okay, so we want to write a loop that counts from 0 to 9. So again, we use the for, and we can either declare our loop counter outside of the loop like this, Or we could actually just declare it inside of here as well. You could do it this way. And what do we want it to execute to? We want to count from 0 to 9. So the condition has to be from I is less than 10 because we want to include 9. 9 is less than 10. And so we have 0 to the item less than 10. And then we have to increment I. And, this would be our loop. We could see out. You'd see out I, put an end line so that we have a carriage return, and this would write 0 through 9 going down the screen. So that was a for loop. A while loop is needed when you don't know how many times you're going to execute the loop. With a for loop, you have to know exactly how many times you're going to execute it. With a while loop, we can keep looping until a condition is met. And so, you might be waiting till the user puts a certain type of input in, or a certain condition gets met in a formula. That's often what you might use a while loop. You can also use it to perform an exact number of times as well. So here we have a while loop, the format for the while loop. I use the while keyword, and with a while, you just have a condition. It's going to keep looping this block of code until this condition is met, or as long as this condition is met. As soon as this condition becomes false, then it'll drop out of the loop. So here's an example from your book on how this looks. Here's the flow chart. Let's say we initialize count to 0. If we want to do the same kind of exact loop with a while loop, you would do this. You'd say, as long as count is less than 50, keep printing hello world, and then inside the loop we have an increment count. We don't write it inside of the while here. We just in somewhere inside of this code we have to have something that eventually makes this condition become false. If you don't, you get an infinite loop. It'll never break out of this loop. So while loops are kind of dangerous in that respect, that if you don't have something that changes the one of the elements in your conditional, it will never break out. In this case, we increment I, it comes back around, and it'll keep adding one to the count until count is equal to 50, and then it'll exit. So let's try writing a while statement that will display the numbers from 10 to -1. So we got to go backwards in this one. So pause, try to write down the answer on a sheet of paper or something, and then hit continue. So in this instance, we're going to write a while statement. So it's the while keyword, and we need a condition. Well, if we're going from 10 to -1, and let's see, we need a variable. So we're going to declare an int called count, and we need to know, what do we initialize it to? Well, it's starting at 10, so it would be logical to start at 10. And in this case, the question is what is our condition? We want to stop when it gets to -10, or actually it gets after it gets to -10. So it's really as long as its count is greater than -11, because we're going backwards. And we'll see out count maybe with this just to make it interesting. And then we need something to change. Well, we need count to change. If I did this, well, what would happen? We'd start off at 10, then we'd go to 11, and 12, and 13. It would keep incrementing. It would never get to -1. And each time it would be greater than -11. We need this to be minus. So now what happens is it starts off as 10, then it goes to 9, then 8, 7, all the way down until it gets to -10. -10 is okay because -10 is greater than -11. And then when it gets to -11, -11 is not greater than -11, so then it would stop. So that's how you would build that loop. So with a while loop, the condition is evaluated first. And sometimes that's the structure you want. And with a while loop, it is possible to not actually ever execute. It is possible to have this condition be false right away, and then to never execute the code inside of the while. With a do while loop, we have a different structure. We start off with the keyword do, and the do while loop always executes at least once. So when the code gets to the do, it'll do the block of code here, and then at the end of executing that block of code, that's when it will evaluate the condition. That's why your while is at the end. Notice there's a semicolon at the end of a do loop, whereas with a while loop, there's no semicolon here. So the flowchart for a do while loop looks like this. Here we have initialization of some variable. This is the code that's in our block of code which we're looping for. We increment count right away. We check to see if count is less than 50, and if that's still true, we go back up and do another iteration. So it basically puts the conditional on the other side of the block of code. And this is what it looks like code-wise. See out hello world, increment the count, and see if count is still less than 50, and just keep looping around. So let's do this. Let's do a while statement that displays numbers from 7 to 1. Again, we're going backwards in this instance. So pause, try to write it down, and then hit continue. So again, this with a do loop, we put the do part first. And we're going to need a variable to be declared. So let's say int num. And we need it initialized. So we'll start off as equal to 7 because that's where we're starting. And we'll say, well, let's see out our number. And then we need to write our while statement. So now what's the conditional? It's while num is greater than 1. And then the question is, what do we need to do with num? Well, since we're counting down from 7 to 1, we'll use minus minus. So now it'll start off as 7. While num is, it should print out something like this. You know, it'll start out as 7. Then it'll be 6. Is 6 greater than 1? Yes. Then 5, then 4, then 3. Is 3 greater than 1? Yes. 2, 1. When it gets to 1, 1 is not greater than 1, so then it'll stop the loop. So at this point, please complete the demo on loops. Thank you very much.